everyone, and welcome back to the Fly Culture Podcast with me, your host, Pete Tigers. We're back out fishing today. I've driven over to Dorset and I'll spend some time fishing a new piece of water with friend of the podcast, John Applin. We're going to just talk about life in general. We're going to talk about fishing and we're going to see if we can catch some fish. You know, recently that I've been talking a lot about the ability to stalk fish, and I'm hoping that's going to be the case today. So I'm really looking forward to this aspect of it. The temperature's a little bit cooler this morning, but the wind has dropped. We've had that cooling breeze that I'm sure you're aware of as well, but that seems to have eased back a little bit now. So it's a pretty still day. So it could be some fun fishing. So John, it's great to be back with you, bud. You've been the perfect host as always. Sausage sandwich, cup of coffee. We're just rigging up at the moment. But how's the year been for you, mate?
Well, let's say interesting. Bit of a challenge, like most years. Weather up and down, 6 months of rain, followed by another 4 months of rain. 1 or 2 hot spells, bitterly cold up until Mayfly. Not much fly life, not a lot of fish being caught. But when the Mayflies started, they were spasmodic. But the fish came up and we had a few good fish caught, and that just put a spring in everyone's step and set them up for the rest of the year. People have been out fishing. There's been a few fly hatches, a few olives coming off, a few sedges, lots of midges and rising fish. So we're going to explore somewhere a little bit different today and see what happens.
That sounds great. And it's been a good year for you with guests, because obviously you offer accommodation as well, and you've had people coming to stay with you and fish, and that's been good and busy as well. People still, because I guess post-COVID and everything else, where people can travel in that world. But are you finding people are still coming to holiday in the UK and come down and visit you?
Yeah, 100%. I mean, we're fortunate. I think probably our fishing guests, 95% are repeat bookings year after year. Got lots of bookings for next year coming in. We're full up until November. I think Christmas is full, people fishing. So it's it's great. It's been a lovely journey all the way through.
And for listeners who, I'm sure there's not going to be many that don't know you, but if they don't, for listeners, and we have people listen around the world, where are we in geographically, and what would be your sort of nearest sort of river? We don't have to be too specific about things, but so people get a sense of where we are right now.
So I suppose the nearest river is the Froome. It's a valley over from here, in Dorset, southern England, on a slightly muggy, overcast day with very little wind. So I'm feeling quite optimistic about today.
Always a dangerous thing to say. But I know we were talking about breakfast as well, and we were talking about living so close to a river. And if you're listening, I know I went and visited you recently, and you live right on the banks of a river, and I was trying to get a sense of, if you had a dream situation that you had a piece of trout stream or a lake nearby where you live, whether you would fish it all the time. And I just get an idea from you as well, John, that you're very, very close to the river. How does that interact with your life? Does that mean that you'll say to yourself, actually, it feels good tonight, I'm going down? Do you think about that on a daily basis, or how does it work when you have something so wonderful so close?
That's a good question, Pete. But I think you're on the river, every day, and I just love listening to the stories of our guests and anglers when they come back off the water. That's the most rewarding thing. Secondly, I love working on the river probably a bit more than I like fishing it. But just occasionally, like last night, I suddenly thought, oh my God, I'm just going to go and have a fish. And I took a rod. I'm not going to lie, I did take some crisps and a bottle of wine with me, and I just sat there and watched the river for an hour, saw a kingfisher, 1 or 2 deer kicking about. Tiny fish rose. I think I cast a fly and then wandered back to the house, but it was just gorgeous.
Does that come with maturity, do you think? If a young John, 20 or so years younger, do you think you'd have still done it in exactly the same way?
No, probably not. No, I think 20 years ago you'd race to the river, you'd fish from dawn till dusk, and probably a bit after. No, I don't know. I think we're incredibly lucky to get to where we are in our angling careers. We're actually perhaps catching a fish doesn't matter that much, and the whole sort of package, the ecosystem, and if you catch a fish, it is quite rewarding, but it's not the most important thing.
And you talk about the ecosystem, and you touched a little bit on the hatches and the mayfly and how everyone had a bit more of a spring in their step. Have the hatches been good and consistent for you? You haven't seen a decline or an increase? Have you detected, as somebody who has their finger on the pulse and is so closely aligned with rivers, have you seen any differences that have been noticeable this year?
Yeah, I think it's all theories, isn't it? But the mayfly, even though it was good, spasmodic, it wasn't as good as previous years. And maybe that's got something to do with 6 months of rain and flooded rivers that just washed a lot of the silt out. And as we all know, that's the habitat where the mayfly lives. So in the next coming years, we might see a little bit of a change there. The blue-winged olive, that's definitely declined over the years. I mean, there's still some prolific hatches for those that stay out late, and you've got to stay out late. There's plenty of sedges. I mean, we're getting a few daddy longlegs now, and there's always plenty of midges. So there's stuff happening, and when you do a kick sample, there's always plenty of bugs for the fish to eat. So, I'm not too concerned at the moment. It's just nice when they come up and rise during the day. It's not that long ago you get a torrential, muggy downpour in July, and you'd have blue-winged olives pouring off. Don't see that so much now, which is it's a bit sad, but hey ho, there's fish in the river still.
That's the great thing about it, and we've been setting up. But before we wander down to the river, I've not seen it, so I'm starting to get very, very excited. But we talk in fly culture about communities and building communities and connecting people together. And John, you're a wonderful example of that, where you put syndicates together, you assemble groups together with your chalk stream evenings and put communities of people together. You must be pretty proud and enjoy doing that too.
Oh, 100%. But yeah, really proud. I mean, we've been able to put chalk stream fishing together at a very affordable price. We've got great landlords that just want to get people fishing like we do, and we've made chalk stream fishing, wild chalk stream fishing, I've got to emphasise that, available to all. And we've had quite a few complete beginners come through as well, especially with the little syndicate. Chalk Stream Club, we've tried to bring it all into the local village hall, where we have great guest speakers and social evenings, completely informal. And that, again, has brought a lot of people together. It's carved out a lot of really nice friendships. So, yeah, I'm very, very proud of what we've done.
Keep doing it, buddy. Keep doing it. And we've rigged our rods up because we were too excited. I fished with Luke Bannister yesterday and fished a bamboo rod of his that I'm very attached to, and have set that up, and I've got a small stimulator on there. John's fishing. How long's your rod, bud?
It's 8'6" 4-weight.
And what have you got on?
Some terrestrial hoppery thing.
And the plan, I think, initially is to see if what's happening early on, John's thought process. We haven't tied. We've tied the flies on before we've gone to the river, on the basis that he thinks there probably won't be a great deal going on. Of course, we can change that if the river dictates something different when we get there. But the plan, I think, is to try and bring a fish up. So we're going to be fishing some dry flies. I'm really, really excited to go and see what this river looks like. There's nothing like seeing the river for the first time. And if you're a regular listener to the podcast, you know I have a thing for small streams. This is a small stream with the added bonus of being a chalk stream as well. I think our fly choice is just about right. The wind's up a tiny bit. Doesn't appear to be many bugs on the water. And I think the bring 'em up approach might be the right one, as John had called. So fingers are tightly crossed for that. But it's like, I've said it before, it's like when you go to a football or cricket match and you walk up the steps and look at the pitch for the first time. This is very similar for me, and I think I might be very close to heaven if I'm not in it. It's just a beautiful little stream. Some of it here isn't very wide at all, and I'm looking upstream and it's probably only about 4 foot wide, if that, yet widens out in front of us. The river makes a very, very slight turn, and it probably gets to 6, 7, 8, 9 feet across, but that's it. It looks as though it's a little shallower in part here, but John was talking about some deeper pots as well, and was telling me about some of the fish that he's caught here over the years. But you can see it's not heavily fished. There's no mown paths. John, this sort of fits in with your ethos, doesn't it? The minimal intervention, caring for the fish rather than the fisherman.
I think you're right, Pete. It's big fish on tiny streams, dare I say it, and I'll shoot myself in the foot again. They thrive on neglect, little angling pressure, little or no maintenance. We're quite lucky to have some of that sort of fishing. This particular little stream, as Pete said, is tiny. It's got some quite deep spots that you can only just wade through. It is in the middle of nowhere, and we have had some quite large fish out of it over the years. It gets very lightly fished, I don't know, half a dozen times a year by our tiny weeny syndicate. It's only half a dozen people in it. Passionate guys that only come once in a blue moon. So this particular little bit of heaven is left unspoilt.
And I'm very fortunate to be one of those people in this tiny syndicate, and it's getting on into August and I've not had a chance to get over, and I've seen it and I feel very, very lucky. This is my sort of fishing. Where we parked, I've done my 3 words, so I know where to come now, and figuring out where the access points are, those sorts of things. And I said, it's, as John described it, as a deer path really, and we're sort of following that. That's a little way back from the river, but it is, again, it's the places that fishing takes us to. It's the experiences that we get. And I mentioned it to John. I knew one of the other, or I've met all of the syndicate people now, and asked them, and John's such a generous, good person that I didn't want to ask him first, because I knew he'd give me lots of time and I knew I'd get really well looked after. But I feel lucky that I'm with him today and I get the opportunity to see a little bit more of this stream. But it looks like the Bring 'em Up approach is going to be the right one, doesn't it?
Fingers crossed. Yeah, you never know, do you? When I walk down this bit of fishing, I get almost 2/3 of the way down, I suppose, and it sort of opens out into a very reedy meadow, a few deer paths, and I quite often just stand here and just think, my God, we're lucky, it's quiet, bird song, and maybe a fish rising.
We're at the very bottom of the beat, and John says there's a pot at the very bottom that sometimes there's a fish sits in. So he's got his Polaroids on. He has bow and arrowed into this spot, looking to see if he can bring someone to come up, take a look. But doesn't look like there's anyone home. The river here again, pretty shallow, pretty narrow. And it looks absolutely beautiful. Fishing one of these spots for the first time, you're trying to drink everything in, trying to think, right, where's the shot? Where's it going to be? And there's a spot in front of me where a tree is sort of splitting the river, or a large bush or a branch or something. So you've got 2 flows, and I didn't notice the second flow until a little bit later, and runs into some nice softer water. And you can see there's a junction where perhaps a fish might sit. I covered it, but nobody at home. I have spooked one fish walking through. But John, your strategy for this real close-up fishing, I guess, are you sort of taking a shot and then moving on?
Tend to try and fish it as slow as you physically can without pushing any waves or pushing any water up in front of you. Just bow and arrowing sort of methodically into little holes, little pockets under the bank. Yeah, and then 9 times out of 10 you'll fish a bit really carefully, and you'll walk through it, and all the fish will swim downstream.
I'm sure I'm going to do that a few times. But for somebody who's seen it for the first time, I'm really, really excited to see it. And we're standing sort of, the pot that you suggested I fish was deeper than I was expecting. We're sort of between shin and knee deep a lot of the time. But I'm, like I've said in the introduction, that, this is my sort of fishing. This is the thing I love. Plus you've got the added bonus of it being a chalk stream. But for somebody who's known water like this for so many years, and probably this beat pretty well as well. And I know you were telling me off mic about the deer that you sat and watched one time, and a picture that you'd put out for a little syndicate here about a fish that you caught. But do you still get as excited stepping into this spot, somewhere that you know just so incredibly well?
100%, Pete. I've been tinkering about down here for close to 40 years now. And it's as exciting today as it ever has been.
And you said about when you took the lease of this on a little while back that you had to go through a sort of a nerve-wracking interview for getting it. And, for somebody who works, because, as a former, when I was guiding, that people would offer me water sometimes, and then there'd be an uproar against it because they felt it was going to be used and abused by thousands of people tramping through, which of course was never going to be the case. It was the places like that would be somewhere I would occasionally take people and keep it for somewhere special. But do you find that because of what you do and in these valleys, are you sort of approached by people who say, actually, would you be able to help with the habitat of the river and perhaps take it on?
Yeah, it does happen from time to time. Take little bits on, tinker them and fiddle about, and then of course, they just get incredibly lightly fished. I mean, this bit of river we're on today has probably been fished 6, maybe 7 times this year, and it's doubtful that it'll get fished much more before the end of the season. It's heaven.
And you said about when putting the sort of syndicate together, those are the sort of things that you're thinking about, aren't you? That when you're asking people if they'd be interested, that it's going to be something that they're going to cherish, they're going to enjoy, but they're not going to hit it every single week.
Absolutely. Our rods come down here literally once in a blue moon, and then we have a little work party in the winter to trim a few branches back, and that is literally it. It's completely left wild.
And the fish seem to do okay as a result of it.
Yeah, definitely. There's 1 or 2 good fish we've had over the years. Handful of the recruitment's pretty good. There's lots of good spawning area adjacent to lots of adult fish habitat. So it's and a huge amount of it's so overgrown that there's very little predation down here. Cormorants simply cannot get anywhere near it.
And for me, you were one of the people who really went for that fish first policy, certainly when we look towards chalk streams, that letting the river be as wild as it possibly can for the benefit of the fish. And I guess we're starting to see a little bit more of that. I've had podcast guests from fishing clubs who've talked about these things, but that must be a proud thing as well, that you were sort of fighting the vanguard for this really early on, weren't you?
Yeah, 100%. It was, I think it's one of the last little chalk streams in southern England that has never really had anything done to it. It has been left to nature. So we're quite privileged to be stood in this spot, but we've got to be quiet so we don't spoil it for the wildlife.
Absolutely.
I just caught the most beautiful, 5-6 inch fish, if that. Chubby as you like, full fins, the most wild little fish in a very wild place. And actually the hairs on my neck have stood up, and it's just, it's lovely. Love it.
Been working upstream, and watching John fish reminded me of a wonderful tip if you're fishing small streams. We obviously focus on what's right in front of us, but before he makes any cast, I watch him have a glance behind him, see where his back cast is going to go, where he can fit it, and what cast he needs to make to get it through that little gap. But yeah, it's a great little tip for when you're fishing in closed spaces. Have a quick look behind you. Don't hope your cast's going to go through there, but sort of figure out, right, where are you going to put it? Do you need to put your rod over to the side a little bit to get a shot or not. And they're little things that make life a little bit easier and saves you a few pennies on flies as well. It's been a case of bow and arrow casts, if you get enough line of sort of improvised roll casts to get into channels, into spots. John's had a fish. I managed to stuff one that rose. I couldn't see the fly when the sun was on the water, so operator error there. And the wind's been blowing a little bit, so it makes thinking about where you're putting the fly and where your cast's going to go. And also one of the things is because it's so the tree branches are so low, there might be bushes, there might be anything else. When you're in a spot that you think this is, and there's so many, I've felt, God, there's going to be a fish here, I'm going to have a fish here, that you play out. We talked about thinking about where your back cast's going, but also the strike. So I'm always thinking, when I've popped the fly into a spot, how am I going to strike in a restricted area? And again, that's a really good practice to get into. And we talk often on here about playing the cast through and the shot through, but there's also those other aspects of it about if a fish does take, what do you do? And so some of those things, and also playing, right, where's the fish going to go if I get it on? How am I going to do that with that restricted area, and how I'm going to strike on the fish? So all of those things I think about, but it's been really, really interesting. We've had a relatively okay drop in temperature and along with the wind. So the fish have been, sometimes you'll walk along and they come from a bank. And John did a really interesting exercise where weather conditions, there's not much hatch about as well, so there's not a huge amount to stimulate the fish right now, but that was quite an interesting experiment with your rod, wasn't it?
It certainly was. We're on a little straight bit, and there should have been fish sat out on some gravel. Like Pete said, no fly life as such. It's blowing a hoo. That bank's probably a bit undercut. That's where they are, and sure enough, the rod tip went under the bank and it went back probably 4 feet. So they don't have to go far to get out of sight completely. Nice sultry day, long evening with some sedges coming off, and they'll all come out and play. Not today.
And that's the really interesting thing, that you think, well, where can these fish go? And then it might be an interesting exercise if you're able to do that, to see how far those banks go and what might even come out as a result of that. But I couldn't believe seeing half of John's rod disappear under the bank, and it was a really, really big surprise. But the other thing I wanted to talk to John about as well was the aspect of rising and the behaviour of fish. And of course, being on chalk streams here, you get to see that behaviour of the fish as it comes up and takes it. And I was fishing with Luke Bannister yesterday, and we happened to be talking about this. And at home on the rivers I fish in Devon, they generally, and certainly the Tor where I spend most of my time, has a bit of colour in it. And we were talking about fish missing the fly sometimes, not hitting it cleanly. Sometimes the smaller ones will whack it as well, with their tail sometimes as well. But it's been fascinating to see that. And then yesterday, there was a fish I could see, and it was a really interesting behaviour, that it sort of moved like a chalk stream fish when I threw the fly in its direction. It moved slowly to it, and the last 3 or 4 inches, it really launched itself at it. Now, I don't know what it made it do that. Would it be competition? Would it be that clarity? So it's making sure it hones in on that fish really, really, the fly, really, really quickly. But how they behave. And John, do you have any observations from how fish behave in this chalk stream environment when they're coming to take a fly? Do you see situations where perhaps they might miss it as well? Or in a chalk stream, may it be that the water is that much clearer that they get a really good look at it?
I think the variety's endless, like on any river, Pete. To be fair, there's long, slow rises where they look at the fly and come up and take it slowly and confidently. Other times they'll smash it, they'll bow wave across the stream to take it and then miss it. I mean, it's all different. I think that's why we go fishing. We never really know what's going to happen. And we were saying earlier, Pete, that we've got so many theories about why we're not catching fish, weather conditions, hatches, where the fish are, and so on and so forth. But I think, well, no, if you went fishing every day and you caught loads of fish, you'd lose interest quite quickly, I think.
I think that's the fun of it, and like we were saying, I know off mic, that it is trying to figure it out, and I think that's what the attraction of this for me, why it's so great, is because I can't figure it out, and trying to understand it or trying to see something that makes you think, oh, I wonder if I've edged a little bit nearer to figuring it out, and then of course something else dispels that, and that's been the interesting thing here. I think, we've been fishing bigger flies this morning, and John's one, when it came, just smacked it straight away. The one I had again was a similar sort of case. That opportunistic, I think, was probably the behaviour, wasn't it?
Yeah, 100%. Just once as they rise, once opportunists. And actually, the only fish we've seen rise today have been once as they just come up, and you think, hey, here we go, and then that's it, really.
It doesn't detract from what a beautiful spot this is, and again, standing in a chalk stream that looks wild, and that's what I love about it. It just is fantastic, and it makes me think as an angler, and that's what I love. I don't want it super easy that you can make long, delicate casts. You have to think, and that's what I've been trying to say on here about the little tips if you're in a situation like this as well. And it may be you fish a small little stream wherever it might be Devon, it might be up country further up the line somewhere, but those little things that make it so interesting and so much fun too. So we've had this nice thing. I haven't mentioned that the two of us been just taking it in turns, fish the pool, which is always a really nice and fun way to fish. Thrilled to say John had another fish in. We've entered where the pools are slightly longer, slightly deeper, slower, even paced, and yeah, he had a really beautiful trout from a spot. I went up through a pool, and you sometimes fish places and you think, man, yeah, this is it, this is it, this is it, this is it, this is it. But it didn't quite play out that way. But again, the water is absolutely stunning and doesn't detract. And I'm sort of learning a little bit about it. I also said to John, well, I've got left a sandwich in his truck, and perhaps I'll go and grab it so we can share it, split it in half and have it for lunch. And I've just looked up and it's 3:15. And that's how absorbing this fishing has been, that you're just thinking the whole time about what you're doing, getting the shots in the right place. And the fish haven't given themselves up easily, but I just can't believe where that time's gone. So we got to the very top of the beat. We fished hard, we fished long, and the fishing's been tough, but in a challenging way that I absolutely love. I love being tested as an angler. And even though, I rose one fish earlier in the day, I've stepped out and felt I fished pretty okay, actually. Given how tight the river is, I think I stuck one fly in something, we managed to get it back. And that was about it when it was really at its windiest. The sun's come out now, but we're sheltered and we're away from that wind, but I can see the trees moving around a little bit as well. I think that change in temperature possibly made things a little bit tougher as well, but it doesn't mean I haven't enjoyed every second of it. Will I be signing up for next year? 100%. 100%. I absolutely love it. I love what John's done with the water here, just gently tweaked tiny little bits here and there, but it's still challenging fishing. And perhaps fishing like that may not be for everyone, but it's certainly for me, and it's the sort of fishing that really excites and interests me and tests me as a fly angler. And it's something I'm always looking to do, is to continually try and improve, learn something new, and see if I can pit my wits against the fish. But mate, that was just fantastic fun.
I'm glad you enjoyed it, Pete. Yeah, it's a bit of a gem, that.
Without a shadow of a doubt. And yeah, as I said, in parts, I loved how the river changed character as well. And sometimes I was saying to you, oh, this reminds me a bit of a West Country stream. And then it, typical chalk stream, then completely different again. It's a lovely mix, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. You've got everything: meanders, bends, pools, glides, riffles. Loads of it. A feature around every corner, on every straight. I mean, it's just, it's quite a unique bit of fishing. It's one of the last bits of chalk stream in southern England that's never really had anything done to it.
Yeah, and that's really, really nice. I like that a lot, and can only shout about what John does, how he manages water that he looks after. And it is, again, as I said, I think at the beginning, the fish first policy. But John, I've got one fastball for you to end with. We have for our Fly Culture podcast a tune. What sets the tune? What sets the mode? What sets the mood for a day's fishing for you on the river? What's the song that you'd put on if you had a choice?
There's a piece of music called The Bolero by Andre Roux.
Very, very nice. Is that the Torval and Dean one?
Yeah, it is. Yeah.
Now that's very, very great. I like that style as well. Something a bit more left field, so I shall load that up. Mate, it's been fantastic as always to catch up with you. If people, I'm sure loads of people follow you already, but how do they find you on Insta and stuff like that if they need to?
John Applin on Instagram and Facebook, and our website www.chalkstreamflyfishing.co.uk.
Perfect, mate. Thank you for such an awesome day that seemed to disappear incredibly bloody quickly, didn't it?
Thank you, Pete. Yeah, time flies, as they say.
Absolutely. Well, everyone, this has been another episode of the Fly Culture podcast. I hope you've enjoyed this one. We've talked about stuff. We've talked about fishing. We've talked about, some of the things that we notice on the river, some little tips, hopefully, that have been of interest, of use to you. I know a lot of people contact me with what they've taken from the podcast, and I hope you've taken something today, and I hope you've just enjoyed listening to two friends fish up a river. Thanks so much for listening to the Fly Culture podcast.
The Fly Culture podcast is brought to you in association with Fly Culture, a quarterly published magazine owned and run by fly anglers. When it comes to fly fishing, we've got you covered.